Good. I now have the full transcript. Let me write the new story. I had been a kindergarten teacher for 38 years. I know that sounds like a simple life, and in many ways it was. But don't let that fool you. Teaching 5-year-olds how to hold a pencil, how to share, how to look someone in the eye and say, "I'm sorry." That takes more out of you than most people will ever understand. I gave those children everything I had, and I went home every evening bone-tired and completely content. My name is Patricia Holloway, and I'm 67 years old. I lived in a 3-bedroom colonial in Dayton, Ohio that my husband George and I bought the year our daughter was born. We chose it because of the maple tree in the backyard, which sounds ridiculous, but George said any house with a tree like that was a house worth growing old in. He was right about most things. George passed away 4 years ago from pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed in October and gone by February. 4 months. I used to think I understood grief because I had lost my parents. But losing George was a different kind of ruin. I didn't eat properly for 6 months. I forgot to pay the electric bill twice. I sat in his armchair for entire weekends wearing his cardigan because it still smelled like him. What kept me going was my son, Daniel. Daniel is 41 years old. He has my husband's square jaw and my blue eyes, and when he smiles a certain way, it's like looking at a photograph of George at 30. He lives, or he did live, about 20 minutes from me with his wife, Brooke. They had been married 5 years when everything started to unravel. No children yet. Brooke said they were waiting for the right moment, which I later understood to mean the right financial moment. A moment that, as it turned out, they had decided to manufacture using my money. But I'm getting ahead of myself. After George died, Daniel called me every day. Every single day without fail. He would drop by on Sunday afternoons with groceries I hadn't asked for, fix things around the house that weren't quite broken yet, sit with me on the back porch and let me talk about his father for as long as I needed to. I am not a dramatic woman, but I will say this plainly. I don't think I would have made it through that first year without him. So when Daniel called me on a Tuesday morning, 18 months after George's funeral, and told me he had been laid off, my first instinct was not to panic. My first instinct was, how do I help him? The engineering firm he worked for had merged with a larger company out of Atlanta. The Dayton office was being downsized. He wasn't the only one let go. 40 people lost their jobs that day. But knowing that didn't make his voice sound any less hollow when he told me. "Mom, I've got 3 months of severance," he said. "Brooke and I have some savings, but with the mortgage and her student loans, we're going to burn through everything pretty fast." "You'll find something," I told him. "You always do." "I know," he said. It's going to be tight for a little while." I hung up the phone and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. My pension from the school district was $5,400 a month. I owned the house outright. George and I had paid it off 6 years before he died. My expenses were modest. What did I need all that money for? I called Daniel back. "Come stay here," I said. "You and Brooke both. The upstairs rooms are empty. Save your money for when you land on your feet." There was a pause. "Mom, we can't do that. Why not?" Another pause, and then I could hear him relaying what I'd said to Brooke, their muffled exchange on the other end, and Brooke's voice saying something I couldn't quite make out. "Are you sure?" Daniel said. "I offered, didn't I? Don't be stubborn." They moved in 3 weeks later. I gave them the 2 upstairs bedrooms, one for sleeping, one that Brooke immediately converted into what she called a home office, though I never once saw her do any actual work in it. I stayed in my room on the first floor. It was easier for me anyway, with the bathroom right there. The first month was genuinely fine. Brooke made dinner twice a week, elaborate meals that used every pan I owned and left the kitchen looking like a tornado had passed through. But I didn't say anything because she was trying. Daniel applied for jobs every morning. He kept a spreadsheet on his laptop. He showed it to me once, 63 applications in the first 30 days. I was proud of him. Brooke was harder to read. She was a pretty woman, put together in that deliberate way that requires a lot of time and money, always dressed in clothes that seemed slightly too formal for a Tuesday afternoon at home. She had worked in marketing before their wedding, but she'd quit when they got married, and as far as I could tell, she hadn't gone back to it. "I'm doing some freelance consulting," she told me early on when I asked, and I accepted that without pressing. She was pleasant enough to my face. She called me Patricia rather than Mom, which I didn't mind. I'd never been the type to insist on that. But there were small things. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets without asking. She threw away a set of mixing bowls that had belonged to George's mother because they were taking up too much space. She made a face the first time I served pot roast for dinner. A face she covered quickly with a smile, but I saw it. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself I was still raw from losing George and projecting. I told myself to be grateful. Daniel had a partner who was organized and capable. About 6 weeks in, Daniel sat down with me after dinner while Brooke was upstairs. He had that look he got when he was about to ask for something. Chin down, eyes a little apologetic. "Mom, I want to talk to you about the household finances." I set down my tea. "All right." Brooke has been looking at the numbers, and she thinks we could be managing things more efficiently. The grocery runs, the utilities, all of it. She's really good at budgeting. Honestly, she's better at it than I am. She was thinking if you gave her access to your account, she could consolidate everything and make sure the bills are getting paid on time and the money isn't being wasted. I didn't say anything right away. "It would just be easier," Daniel added. "You wouldn't have to keep track of everything yourself." "I've been keeping track of my own finances for 43 years, I said quietly. "I know, Mom. I know. We're not saying you can't handle it. It's just that Brooke has a system, and it would help her feel like she's contributing while she's here." I looked at my son's face. He believed what he was saying. I could see that clearly. He genuinely thought this was a reasonable, helpful suggestion. And maybe I would have thought the same thing in his position. Maybe. "I'll think about it," I said. I thought about it for a week. And then, because Daniel looked exhausted, and because Brooke had made a comment about feeling like a freeloader that had made me feel guilty, I said yes. I added Brooke as an authorized user on my checking account. I gave Daniel a spare debit card. "Just for household things," I said. "Groceries, utilities, whatever the house needs." "Of course," Daniel said. "Of course," Brooke echoed, smiling. That smile, I have replayed it in my mind so many times since then, not because it was cruel. It wasn't. It was warm and grateful and entirely convincing. But there was something underneath it, something I filed away without understanding it yet. Things change slowly. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't lived it. It wasn't like a light switch. It was like the temperature dropping 1 degree at a time until you realize you've been sitting in the cold for hours and you don't know exactly when it happened. The groceries got sparse first. Brooke said she was doing a pantry audit, getting rid of things that were past their prime, buying only what was needed. I noticed the fruit bowl was empty more often than not. I noticed the meat in the refrigerator disappeared faster than it seemed like the 3 of us could eat it. When I mentioned that I was craving fresh salmon, Brooke said it wasn't in the budget that week and made me canned tuna instead. I was eating canned tuna in my own home. On my own pension. But I didn't say that. I nodded and said thank you and ate my tuna. Meanwhile, I started noticing things. A new throw blanket on the couch I hadn't bought. Brooke's car had a new set of floor mats. Daniel was wearing a jacket I'd never seen before. A nice one, heavy canvas with leather trim. "End of season sale," he said when I asked, and I let it go. I tried to check my bank balance online one afternoon in the third month. I went to the website and put in my password, and it told me the credentials were incorrect. I tried twice more. Same message. I found Daniel in the kitchen. "I can't get into my bank account," I said. "I think something's wrong." He didn't look surprised. "Oh, Brooke updated the login for security. There's been a lot of phishing stuff going around. She set up two-factor authentication. It goes through her phone now." I stood there. Why would it go through her phone now? I stood there. Why would it go through her phone? I asked. "It's my account. It's just easier to manage from one device," he said. "Mom, I promise nothing is wrong. The bills are getting paid. Everything's fine." He said it so reasonably. He said it the way you'd explain something to someone who was confused and maybe a little frightened, gently, reassuringly. And I was both of those things. So I nodded and went back to my room. But that night, I lay awake for a long time. I wanted to call my friend Gloria. Gloria Turner had been my colleague for 22 years. She taught second grade, the classroom right next to mine. She was the kind of woman who said exactly what she thought, which had occasionally driven me crazy and had always, in the end, been exactly what I needed. We talked on the phone every week, usually on Thursday evenings. But Daniel had started answering my cell phone when it rang if I happened to leave it on the kitchen counter, which I did more and more because my arthritis was getting worse and it was easier. He would see it was Gloria and say, "Gloria's calling, you want to talk to her." But somehow I always seemed to say no. I was tired. It wasn't a good time. I'd call her back. Except I didn't call her back. And eventually her calls got shorter, more tentative, and I could hear the worry in her voice that I wasn't naming. "Patricia, are you okay?" she asked me once, her voice careful. "I'm fine, Gloria, just tired." Daniel was standing in the doorway of the living room. "Tell her I said hi," he said. I told her. I hung up. I looked at my son standing in that doorway and tried to find in his face the boy who had sat with me in George's armchair during those long nights after the funeral, who had held my hand at the cemetery without saying a word, because there were no words good enough. I found him. He was still there. And that made it so much worse, because it meant I kept finding reasons to trust him. The pain medication was the turning point. I have degenerative arthritis in both knees. I've had it for years. I take a prescription anti-inflammatory that costs about $45 a month. Not cheap, but not impossible either. When my prescription ran out in the 5th month, I asked Daniel for the debit card to go to the pharmacy. "We're a little tight right now," he said. "Can you wait a few days?" I waited a few days, then a week. Then I asked again. "Brooke is working on the budget. We'll get it sorted." The pain in my knees got bad enough that I was walking with a noticeable limp. I started sleeping badly. Without the medication managing the inflammation, I was waking up at 3 in the morning, unable to get comfortable. My joints aching in a way that made tears come to my eyes in the dark, which I found humiliating. I had taught kindergartners with the stomach flu and never cried. Being brought to tears by my own knees felt like a defeat. I started finding ways to stay in my room. It was easier than navigating the stairs on bad knee days. Easier than sitting in the living room, where Brooke always seemed to be watching something on the television at a volume that felt slightly too loud. Easier than making conversation when I felt so thin and invisible. I lost track of my account balance because I couldn't access it. I told myself the bills were being paid. Daniel said the bills were being paid. That had to be enough. One afternoon, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water and found Brooke at the table with her laptop, going through what looked like financial documents. She closed the screen when she heard me, casually, not quickly enough to seem startled, but definitely before I could see anything. "Just going over some stuff," she said, smiling. "Of course," I said. I got my water and went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed and thought about the fact that I had said, "of course," as if it were perfectly natural for someone else to be managing my money in my kitchen, while I wasn't allowed to know the balance in my own checking account. I thought about calling a lawyer. I thought about it seriously, sitting there on that bed. I even found a legal aid number on my phone from an old bookmark. But Daniel walked past my room at that moment and paused in the doorway. "You doing okay, Mom?" he said. "Fine," I said. And I put the phone down. I'm not proud of that. I've spent a lot of time in the months since trying to understand why I did that, why I kept capitulating even when some part of me was screaming that something was deeply wrong. My therapist has a word for it. She calls it coercive control, the way the environment had been shaped so that every exit I could see had been quietly blocked. I couldn't access my money. I was separated from the friends who might have helped me think clearly. I was in pain and malnourished enough that my thinking wasn't as sharp as it should have been. And underneath all of it was the thing I couldn't say out loud. I was terrified of losing Daniel. George was gone. My parents were gone. My sister had moved to Arizona years ago, and we'd grown apart in the way that happens without anyone meaning it to. Daniel was my family. He was the most important person left in my world, and even as I watched him become someone I didn't recognize, I kept finding reasons to believe the version of him I remembered. That was my cage, not the empty pantry or the locked bank account. It was love, a love they had learned to use against me like a key. In the 7th month, I lost 17 pounds. My clothes hung off me in a way that was startling when I caught my reflection. I had always been slender, but sturdy, a small woman with what George used to call good posture and opinions to match. The woman in the mirror looked frail in a way I'd only ever seen in my elderly students' grandparents. I was 67 years old, and I looked 80. One Thursday evening in November, my sister called. Sandra is 5 years younger than me, practical and direct, in the way I have always secretly envied. We had talked less frequently since she moved to Scottsdale. Our rhythms were different. The time zone mattered more than it should. But she had left me 2 voicemails in the past month that I hadn't returned, and apparently that had worried her enough to keep calling until someone answered. Daniel wasn't home. Brooke was in the shower. My phone was in my hand. I answered. "Patricia," Sandra said. "Are you all right? You looked terrible on the video call we did last month. You looked, I don't know how to say this, you looked like you'd been sick." "I'm fine," I started. "No, you're not," she said. "I've been talking to Gloria. She's worried too. She says you keep cutting calls short and you never sound like yourself anymore." "Patricia, what is going on over there?" Something in me broke open when she said Gloria's name. It was such a small thing, just a name, just the knowledge that someone had been paying attention even when I thought I'd become invisible. But it undid me completely. I started crying before I knew I was going to. I told her everything. I talked for 45 minutes in a low voice with one eye on the doorway. I told her about the bank account and the food and the knees and the medication I hadn't been able to buy, and the morning I'd found a listing for my house on a real estate app that I'd stumbled across while looking for something else, a listing that described the property as estate sale pending, words that made no sense to me because I hadn't agreed to sell anything. Sandra was very quiet while I talked. That silence was one of the most frightening things I've ever experienced, because Sandra is never quiet. Sandra always has something to say, and her silence told me she was doing what she did when something was serious. She was listening and thinking and deciding what to do. "I'm coming," she said when I finished. "You don't have to. I'm coming Saturday. I'm buying the ticket right now while I have you on the phone. Don't tell Daniel." I almost said, "Daniel will be upset." I caught myself. "All right," I said. Sandra arrived at 11 on a Saturday morning with a rolling carry-on and the expression of someone who had come prepared for an argument. Daniel opened the door before I could get there, and I watched from the hallway as his face did something complicated. Surprise, then a fast recovery, then a smile that was almost convincing. "Aunt Sandra," he said, "we didn't know you were coming." "No," she agreed, "you didn't." She came straight to me and hugged me, and I felt her arms go tight around me and then tighter, and I realized she was feeling how thin I was, pressing her hands gently along my back, taking inventory of what had happened to me. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. "Let me make you some tea," she said, her voice very steady. She went to the kitchen. I followed. Brooke appeared at the top of the stairs in that unhurried way she had, as if she always arrived precisely when she wanted to be seen. "Sandra," Brooke said warmly, "what a nice surprise." "Isn't it?" Sandra said, filling the kettle. I watched Sandra open my pantry. She stood there for a long moment looking at the near-empty shelves, a box of crackers, 2 cans of soup, a bag of rice that had been there for months. She opened the refrigerator, a carton of eggs with 3 eggs left, some condiments, half a lemon. She closed the refrigerator door. She turned around. Her face was completely composed. "Where's the rest of the food?" she asked. "We've been doing a clean eating rotation," Brooke said from the doorway. "Fresh groceries every few days rather than stockpiling. It's actually better for Patricia," Sandra said, looking at me. "When did you last eat today?" "I had some crackers this morning," I said. "Before that, I tried to think. Soup. Yesterday evening." Sandra looked back at Brooke. Something passed between them, Sandra's expression level and unreadable, Brooke's shifting almost imperceptibly from confident to guarded. "Patricia," Sandra said, "I'd like to take you to lunch, just the 2 of us." Daniel appeared then as if summoned. "We were actually about to make something here." "Great," Sandra said. "Then I'll have my sister to myself, and you 2 can eat here." She picked up her purse. "Ready?" She had my coat in her hand. I don't know when she picked it up. I put it on and we walked out the front door. In the car, she didn't immediately speak. She drove us to a diner 3 miles away, a place I used to go with George on Saturday mornings. And she ordered coffee and eggs and toast and a full breakfast plate for me, without asking what I wanted. And when the food came, she watched me eat for a moment, with an expression I recognized from our childhood. The look she used to get when she was very, very angry and was deciding where to put it. "There's a woman I know," she said finally, "from Scottsdale. Her name is Renata, and she's a family law attorney who specializes in elder financial abuse. I called her from the airport." I put my fork down. "Sandra, I'm not asking your permission," she said gently. "I'm telling you what I've already done. Renata is going to call you this afternoon. You don't have to decide anything today, but you are going to talk to her." I looked at my sister across the table. She was 62 and entirely certain, and I thought about what a strange and beautiful thing it was to have a person in your life who simply decided to come when you needed them, without being asked, without waiting to be invited, just because they knew. "All right," I said. "Renata called at 3 o'clock. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a pharmacy because Sandra had driven me there and waited in the car while I picked up my medication, paying for it herself. Renata was brisk and specific and not unkind. She asked me a series of questions: when I had given access to the account, whether I had signed anything, whether anything had been sold from the property without my knowledge. That last question made me pause. "Some furniture," I said slowly. "George's roll-top desk, 2 of my grandmother's chairs, a lamp that had been my mother's. Daniel said it was just making space." "Were you paid for any of those items?" "No." She asked me a few more things, and then she said, "Patricia, what has been described to me is financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. In Ohio, that's a second-degree misdemeanor at minimum, and a felony if the amounts are significant enough, which in this case they may well be. I would like to help you, but I need you to understand something first. This is going to be hard. These are people who live in your house and who you love. Are you prepared for it to be hard?" I watched a woman walk out of the pharmacy with a small bag. She was about my age. She moved easily, without pain, comfortable in her body. "Yes," I said. "Sandra stayed that night and the next night and the night after that, sleeping in the upstairs room that had previously been Brooke's office, which necessitated a tense conversation I didn't witness but could partly hear through the ceiling. In the morning, over coffee, she told me what Renata had advised. 2 days later, Renata arrived from Scottsdale. She had connected with the local attorney in Dayton, a man named Howard Park, who joined her, and together they sat at my kitchen table, while Daniel and Brooke sat across from them. Daniel had been confused and then alarmed, and then, when Renata introduced herself and Howard set his briefcase on the table, something that looked almost like relief passed over his face. Like a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long, and someone had finally shown up to help him set it down. Brooke was a different story. She was composed right up until the moment Howard began going through the bank statements he had requested from my bank through a legal hold, statements I had never seen, statements showing 14 months of transactions in an account I supposedly owned. The numbers were extraordinary. In 14 months, $4,800 had been spent at a single home decor website, $11,000 at clothing retailers, $4,000 on a gym membership and personal training sessions, $3,000 in a single weekend at a resort in Nashville. I had been told that weekend that Daniel and Brooke had gone to visit her college friend. Restaurant charges totaling nearly $8,000 over the course of a year, restaurants I had never been taken to. And then in a separate section, Howard highlighted with a yellow marker, transfers. Systematic transfers of $1,200 every second week to an account registered to Brooke under a business name I didn't recognize. "What is this account?" Renata asked, sliding the statement toward Brooke. Brooke said nothing for a moment. Then it was for an investment. "What kind of investment?" Another pause. "An online business. I was building an e-commerce store. With Patricia's money, with money that was going to be paid back. Did Patricia agree to fund this business?" Brooke looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the table. "I told her about it," Brooke said finally. "I explained the plan. She did mention it," I said, "and everyone looked at me. Once. She said she was exploring some business opportunities. She did not ask if she could use my retirement money to fund them, and I did not agree to that." Brooke's composure broke in a very specific and limited way. Just the jaw, just slightly. The rest of her face stayed perfectly arranged. Daniel finally raised his head. His eyes were red. "Mom," he said. "Don't," Sandra said quietly before I could respond. Howard took over from there. He laid out the figures plainly and without drama. $78,400 in documented withdrawals and transfers that were either personal expenditures or directed to Brooke's business account over 14 months. My pension was $5,400 a month. They had been receiving the entirety of it and leaving me with a cash allowance that, in some months, amounted to less than $40. "We would like to resolve this civilly," Howard said. "There are two paths available. In the first path, you acknowledge the debt in writing, sign a repayment agreement, vacate this property within 72 hours, and Patricia reserves the right to pursue criminal charges at a later date if repayment terms are not maintained. In the second path, we file a formal complaint today with the Montgomery County Adult Protective Services and the District Attorney's Office, and you respond to those charges with your own representation." Daniel looked at Brooke. I had spent 14 months watching him look at Brooke before he decided anything. This time, for the first time, I watched Brooke look down first. "We'll sign," Daniel said. The next few hours were procedural and painful. Documents were produced and signed. Howard made an inventory of the furniture and items that had been sold without my permission. He'd found several of them listed on resale apps. My grandmother's chairs photographed in someone else's living room, and added their estimated value to the debt. Renata photographed everything. I sat at my own kitchen table and watched my son sign papers acknowledging that he owed me $78,400 plus the value of the sold items. When it was done, Howard gave them their copy of the agreement and told them they had until Thursday to remove their belongings. Brooke went upstairs without a word. Daniel stayed at the table after everyone else had given us space. He was looking at his hands. "Mom," he said, "I don't know how to." "Then don't," I said. "I need you to understand that it wasn't." He stopped, started again. Brooke kept saying it was temporary, that when the business took off, we'd pay you back everything with interest and you'd never even know the difference. I know how that sounds. I know. "You knew I couldn't get into my own bank account," I said. "You knew I was in pain and couldn't buy my medication. You came home one night when I'd had nothing to eat but crackers, and you brought takeout for the two of you, and you went upstairs without offering me any. Do you remember that?" He flinched. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," I said. "I'm saying it because I need you to know that I remember every day of it, and you have to carry that, Daniel. That's yours to carry." He cried then, not quietly. He put his hands over his face and his shoulders shook, and part of me, a very old, very deep part of me, wanted to put my arms around him. I kept my hands in my lap. "I love you," I said. "I will love you for the rest of my life, but I cannot be near you right now, and you have to let me have that." He left the house on Thursday morning. He carried boxes past me without meeting my eyes. Brooke was efficient and silent and did not say goodbye. I watched from the kitchen window as they loaded their car and drove away, and then I sat down on the floor right where I was standing because my legs simply gave out, and Sandra came and sat next to me on the linoleum and put her arm around me, and we stayed there together for a while. Howard filed a full report with Adult Protective Services. My bank cooperated with an investigation and recovered documentation of every transaction. In Ohio, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult can carry felony charges if the amount exceeds $1,000. We were at $78,000. The district attorney's office reviewed the case. In the end, Daniel and Brooke accepted a civil settlement to avoid prosecution. Full repayment of the documented amount, plus the sold items, $850 a month, structured over 8 years, with any missed payment triggering automatic criminal referral. It was a long time. I knew it was a long time. Howard told me that given the amounts involved and the documentation, criminal charges were winnable but exhausting. and that the civil route gave me more reliable access to what was owed. I chose to believe him. I chose to focus on what was ahead rather than what had been taken. I stayed in the house for 3 months after they left. Sandra came twice more. Gloria came every week, sometimes twice, and we sat in the kitchen I had reclaimed and drank tea, and she didn't require me to be okay. She just sat with me, which was exactly what I needed. I found a therapist, a woman named Dr. Okafor, who worked out of an office near the university and specialized in trauma and elder abuse. The first session I cried for 55 minutes and said almost nothing coherent. The second session was worse. Somewhere around the 6th session, I started to understand what had happened to me, not just as a series of events, but as a system. The way everything had been carefully constructed to keep me contained, compliant, and isolated. "You didn't fail yourself," Dr. Okafor told me once. "You were maneuvered. There's a meaningful difference." That distinction saved me, I think. Not immediately, but over time. I sold the house in the spring. The maple tree in the backyard was just coming into leaf when the buyers came to walk through. A young family. 2 parents and a daughter about 6 years old, who immediately ran to the tree and looked up into the branches with the specific reverence that children reserve for things that are properly magnificent. I watched her from the kitchen window and thought about George, who had been right, as he usually was, that a house with a tree like that was worth keeping. I sold it anyway. Some things are worth keeping, and some things need to be let go. And the trick is knowing which is which. I moved to Scottsdale in July. Sandra found me a small apartment in her neighborhood. 1 bedroom, a little patio with a view of the mountains in the distance, evening light that turns everything amber. I put George's photograph on the windowsill. I bought a good reading chair. I planted 2 pots of herbs on the patio because I have always believed that a home needs something living in it. I started a chair yoga class for seniors at the community center 2 mornings a week. My knees will never be what they were, but they are managed, and I am moving, and that is enough. I am enough. Daniel made his first payment on the 1st of the month without being reminded. He has made every payment since. Howard sends me a quarterly statement. I read it and file it and try not to calculate how many years remain. In December, a card arrived in Sandra's mailbox addressed to me, Daniel's handwriting on the envelope. Careful, the way he used to write in school when he was trying to do something properly. Inside was a single piece of paper. He said he was in therapy. He said he had left Brooke, that she had moved back to wherever she was from, and he had moved into a studio apartment and was working again. He said he was not asking for anything. He said he thought about me every day. He said he was sorry. I read it twice. I put it in the drawer of my nightstand. I didn't throw it away. Sandra asked me once, about 6 months after everything, whether I thought I would ever forgive him. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. "I think forgiveness is something that happens in its own time," I said. "I'm not going to force it, and I'm not going to prevent it. I'm going to let it be what it is." She nodded. She understood. These days I wake up early and sit on my patio with coffee while the mountains go from gray to rose to gold. My knees ache, but less than they did. I have a standing Thursday phone call with Gloria, the same as always, except now I actually answer. I have coffee on Saturdays with Sandra. I have my chair yoga class and my library card and a neighbor named Helen who grows too many tomatoes every summer and brings them over in brown paper bags. I have my pension, which goes into my account and stays there, and I know exactly what the balance is every day. I have my life, which is mine again. That's everything. That is, in the end, the only thing that matters. That it is mine. That I am the one who decides how I spend it, who I spend it with, what gets my time and what doesn't. what I carry forward and what I set down at the side of the road and walk away from. George used to say I was the most stubborn woman he'd ever loved. He meant it as a compliment. I understand now more than I ever did when he was alive that he was right. My stubbornness kept me alive in that house when something softer might not have. And it's what got me here, to this patio, to these mountains, to this quiet morning light that belongs entirely to me. I am 67 years old, and I am still standing. And if you are sitting somewhere tonight feeling small and invisible in your own life, I want you to hear this. You are not too old to reclaim what's yours. You are not too far gone. Someone is looking for you, maybe a sister, maybe a friend, maybe a stranger, who happens to answer when you finally let yourself ask. Don't wait as long as I did. Please don't wait as long as I did. I've spent a lot of time sitting with the question of how I let it go on as long as I did. Not in a self-punishing way. My therapist helped me move past that. But genuinely, curiously, the way you turn a stone over to see what's underneath. And what I found wasn't weakness, exactly. It was love applied without wisdom, which is one of the most dangerous combinations I know. I loved Daniel the way only a mother who has outlived her husband can love an only child. With everything, with a kind of desperate gratitude that he still existed. And they used that, not cruelly, not in the beginning. They used it the way water uses a crack in a foundation, just finding what was already there and widening it steadily over time. What I understand now is that every action has a consequence that compounds. Every time I said nothing when I should have spoken, the silence got easier for them to count on. Every time I justified a missing piece of furniture or a locked bank account or a meal I was never offered, I handed them another degree of permission. I didn't cause what happened to me. I want to say that plainly, because I believed for a while that I had. But my silence was the soil they needed. And on their side, the same logic ran in reverse. Every month they spent freely, the number got larger, and the way back got harder to imagine. Daniel told me later that there was a moment, around the 5th month, when he thought about stopping. He saw me limping across the kitchen, and he felt something he described as a shock, like waking up for a second inside a nightmare. But he didn't say anything. He let Brooke do the accounting, and he went back to telling himself it was temporary and the debt would be repaid, and I would never really know. Every day he made that choice, he moved further from the man I had raised and closer to someone I didn't recognize. That is how it works. Not in one dramatic moment of decision, but in 100 small ones, each so minor it barely registers until you are standing somewhere you never meant to go. What saved me was not anything I did. I want to be honest about that. Sandra saved me. Gloria's quiet persistence saved me. Renata's brisk competence over the phone in a pharmacy parking lot saved me. I had been so thoroughly convinced I was alone that I had stopped looking for the people who were still looking for me. That is the thing I most want you to take from my story. If you are sitting somewhere tonight feeling like the walls have closed in and there is no one left who sees you, someone is looking. The looking doesn't always announce itself. It comes as a voicemail you don't return, a phone call you cut short, a sister who buys a plane ticket without asking permission. Let it find you. Open the door when it knocks. As for Daniel, I think about him sometimes in the early mornings on my patio, watching the mountains go from gray to gold. I think about the boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat of George's car on long drives, and how George would carry him inside without waking him, and how that tenderness is just as real as everything that came after. Life is complicated enough to hold both things at once. I am learning, slowly, to let it. I am 67 years old. I lost a year and a great deal of money, and I nearly lost my health entirely. But I got back the most important thing, the knowledge that I am someone worth fighting for. It took my sister flying across the country to remind me. I won't forget it again.